So I'm working on a brand new record right now, and I'm very excited about it. There's always, I think it's a truism that you're always excited about what you're working on at any given moment. I always think what I'm working on right now is the best thing I've ever done, and it's no exception. I'm really excited about this new record. It's very conceptual. The tracks are very creative, quite experimental. I say that because my last couple of records were a little bit more direct, a little bit more pop, had a little bit more of a pop sensibility. But this record, I've made the decision to kind of go in a completely different direction and be quite self-indulgent. And I think being self-indulgent isn't necessarily a negative thing. I actually love it. I love it when artists I like are kind of self-indulgent. But what I mean by that is that they're kind of just trying to excite themselves about the possibilities of what you can do. And we live in a world now where, in terms of working with plugins and virtual instruments and generally working with computers, the creative possibilities are off the scale ridiculous. And there's also an argument to say that is a negative thing because, one of the great things about classic music, of course, is that the artists that made classic music were always working within a certain set of limitations, whether it was only having 16 tracks on tape or only having a certain amount of processing they could apply to the music and the sounds, and that kind of made them creative. All those old stories about Hendrix going to Eddie Kramer and saying, "I've got this sound in my head. Can you make me a pedal that will do it?" And he had to go off and kind of figure out how to do that. We're almost at the point now where all of those things exist, and then some. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of plugins that will twist and mutate sound in infinite sort of range of ways. And there is a downside to that. It's like you can become bogged down in the possibilities of mutating sound now to the point that you actually forget to write songs. And you just spend weeks and months learning how to mess about with all these plugins. You never get anything done. And I know people like that. And that's cool. Some of them just enjoy that process. To them, it's the process of exploring. They're not even about the end product. They just love messing about. I love to make records. I love to be creative and present records and see myself reflected back, in the reaction people have to what I do. So to me, it's all about making records. But I still have a lot of fun. And what's interesting is I've gone two ways recently. I've actually gone to the point of buying a lot of old analog synths and keyboards. I've got an ARP 2600 over there. I've got a Prophet 5, I've got a Moog, and so what I like about that is the unpredictable nature of analog keyboards, how in a way they can surprise me in a way the guitar no longer does. And I say that because I'm kind of known as a guitar player, but I've got to the point now where the guitar I can no longer surprise myself with the guitar. I've kind of exhausted, and I'm a very limited guitar player anyway, so I've kind of exhausted the possibilities for me with my talent of a guitar. But when I turn on an analog keyboard now, just messing about for a few minutes, I get something that, wow, that's really interesting. And then if you kind of ally that with what you can do with plugins, and again, I kind of approach all of these things like an idiot. And I think it's really important in a way to keep that side of you that doesn't know what you're doing. I really don't know what I'm doing. And sometimes I think people come to me and they think I know what I'm doing, and I really don't. And I think that's good. One of the great things I remember, I was a big fan of Orson Welles, the filmmaker, growing up, and what he said this amazing thing, which he said, sometimes people accuse you. They say, "Oh, it's so amateur. What you do is so amateurish." And he said, "Why is that an insult?" Because the word amateur comes from Spanish word amar, to love what you do. And the whole idea that the amateur is someone who does it out of love. The professionals sometimes do it because they have to, it's their job. But the amateur, to love. I love being an amateur about the way I approach music and the way I download plugins. I don't know what the hell they do. I open them up and I start messing about with them. And that kind of serendipity, being able to stumble across something. And I have the same thing with analog keyboards. And it's interesting how, there is that connection between using an analog keyboard now and loading a plugin that you don't really know what it does. You don't really know what the potential of it is, what the kind of limitations, the parameters of it are. And that's great these days. You have all these plugins that will, you know, randomize things. And, you know, there's these fantastic plugins made by a company they're called Aberrant. I think that's how you say it. And they make a couple of fantastic plugins, one of which I adore. I adore all their plugins, which is called Sketch Cassette. And it emulates the sound of old cassette tapes to the point you can choose the brand of cassette. People that are old enough to remember ferro, chrome, metal cassettes. You can choose how old the tape is, how many times it's been reused. You can add the hiss, saturation, warble, flutter, kind of that tape saturation you get sometimes if you push the meters. I love it. And it adds, what it does is it adds grain and personality to digital sounds. So it's kind of putting back that slightly unpredictable, slightly rusty sound that analog sometimes would give to sounds. These guys are great, and you know, I don't really know what I'm doing sometimes with it. And they make another fantastic plugin also called, they've very recently new one they've marketed called Digitalis, which allows you to corrupt things and add bit rot and you know, warble and all sorts of glitchy stuff, you know. And again, it's very random, but it's very inspiring because you don't know quite what it's going to do to your sound. I love that stuff. I love approaching these things like an absolute idiot, like an amateur. I don't know what it's going to do. Well, wow, that's really cool. And this new album I've making, I've really approached a lot of it in that way. So anyway, out soon, folks. Out probably next spring, I think. Let's try something else. I still prefer my LCD5s. Well, I can see what he's going for, yeah. These have got a little bit more, they're a little bit rounder, around the low mids to me. Actually, they're nice, yeah. These seem to have a little bit more lower mid. I don't know, I mean, it depends. The first track I listened to, I was very clearly favouring those. On this track, okay, I'd still prefer the 5s generally. I mean, there's not a massive amount in it. I guess I'm used to these now anyway. I'm used to the sound of these. They don't flatter, they're very, very honest, and that's what I need, really. I pretty much mix almost entirely now on these. I don't even mix through the speakers anymore. I just mix on... Well, I do, when I get to the surround, obviously I have to break it out into the speakers, but stereo, I just mix on these now. That's what the mix actually sounds like, and I completely trust now what I hear on these, which is great.